Hello and welcome back. My name is Sean and we are back in the Spellmonger universe with book 5, Highmage. This was one that I was very excited to get back because we are returning to the original Spellmonger formula, and I think what made a lot of people the fans of the Spellmonger, we see a lot of this but just done better and more. But to give you guys a bit of an outline, I want to give some general thoughts that are going to be spoiler filled, dive into some specific book spoiler things I want to do. This video won't be a deep dive, so I won't be going through every different plot point, just some that stood out to me, and then also talk about a few series spoilers at large, at least up until book 14-ish. So feel free to skip any of that. I will have timestamps down below so you're safe, but if you are trying to get a spoiler-free reaction from book 5 in a series, no. But to get things started, I do think there is kind of a formula to my favorite Spellmonger books that generally goes something a little like this. This is not a fully fleshed out idea. As I read through this, I think I can actually narrow down what it is specifically, or what the formula is that to me grants the most enjoyment. Where you get a showcase kind of where we left off from the last book, see the new powers and positions that Min has gained, showcase kind of some of the strengths that he got from the last book, along with some new headaches that he got with this one. In this book, Min finally has money.
Who's for me? Let's go back in the bath.
Which was a huge stopping point to book 3, where he was suddenly granted a kingdom and he's trying to bring it up all from scratch, but he is very resource deficient. This book, however, now that he has Snowstone and the money coming in from the Arcane Order, you're seeing a loaded guy that can solve his problems with money, and it is a joy to see because in a bureaucracy and someone in charge, you actually get to see progress, which is very fun to see in this world. But along with that formula, you will also get to see a basically whole bag of new problems get drops on Min that now he has to suddenly overcome, that he may or may not have the tools in order to actually do so. In this book, that's Min getting dropped into suddenly a barony, having to deal with the Alka Council, not knowing what's happening with Shrul and some of the new troop movements, so a lot of new problems that he may or may not be able to find.
Did that go the way you thought it was going to go? Nope.
And in the process of trying to deal with this, you have a bunch of new civilization building, world building. You get to see the unique applications of magic that was set up in the last book and done in very satisfying ways. I think that this book, while you see a lot more later on in the series, now that Min suddenly is not having his kingdom just completely on fire and sort of has the bureaucracy going and starting to actually be able to focus attention back on sort of growing and learning how to do new things, you start to open up the possibilities for what happened. Now that you have Snowstone and some of those gems, you're seeing those like new applications of spells, and I think that this is one of my favorite parts of the Spellmonger series, and what really drew me into it is because while this is a soft magic system, you get to see the magic system expressed in very interesting ways. Throwing Snowstone into the whole situation and lowering the etheric density of magic and seeing how some of these Hawkster pockets can be used, you're starting to see things grow and change and have unintended consequences. In this book, that is Shrul can suddenly control dragons with the Snowstone, but there are a lot of kind of fun, cool things on here that I really enjoyed. But then that leads us to my second favorite part. You will have an epic battle, and in this book, I think you had 2 or 3 major battles. Generally, the first one, you'll start to see that the enemy is also expressing his unique magical advantages in very interesting ways. We started to see new types of goblins, new type of enemies like night cells, while siege worms were in the last book. Now you're going to see Min's reactions to it, and then of course you have just dragons showing up with giant things of Snowstone, and you know, him having to deal with it. And that leads into sort of a kind of get everything back together till we have an even more epic battle where then you see the full expression of everything just kind of culminate in something that I think is very cool. Watching like Dara and her hawks just come down and drop giant rocks out of Hawkster pockets to attack dragons, starting to see the Alkaline trust Min and start to use some of their transgenic magics in order to actually get some sort of advantage, seeing the introduction of the Kasari and just how good they are as like rangers and used in a military context. The last battle in this one was truly epic and just something of a grand, massive scale that I thought was very interesting. And you tie it all together with some sort of spicy ending where somebody in power just starts like, hey, I know things are going good, and you think you have a handle on things that are going, but here is a list of even more problems, just and that is something else that we see at the end of this book with the introduction of gods that are actually now able to be consistent and materialize whenever they want. And you start to find out that there are even bigger problems to Shrule. Now this will continue down on the series, and I'll talk about it in my series spoiler section, but just this general formula of just Min's kind of thinking he knows what's happening, figuring out a cool little unique things to kind of get by with his current problems, only to have those solutions and things just create even more problems for him to certainly go through and get through. This series gets very expansive and the scope just gets truly massive, which is what I really enjoy about it. So just seeing some of these seeds that get set up for later in the series and just watching just how things are truly starting to go every which direction is a lot of fun. But glossing over all that, there are 5 specific things that I wanted to specifically dive on about this book that I really enjoyed. The first off is seeing Min actually start to get more type of ethereal and physical power in this universe. Having him elevated to Baron, and in other fantasy series you think like, oh, well, you get promoted, you get more type of positions and power, you're going to be just much more well off. But what really kind of attracted me to this book, and it's kind of like a weird sort of combination of a few of my favorite genres and books. It's like half Game of Thrones, half just like pure epic power fantasy, which I've never really seen combined in this way before. But having Min being promoted to Baron as kind of like a backhanded sort of thing from the crown, I thought was truly fun to watch. You know, even though you'd think that now he has more pull, more sway, more power, the amount of strengths that comes with and answering directly to the crown and the king and to Tabard are just all these little things that like was really interesting to think about. I've said it before in my other videos, but just watching the complex political hierarchy of a feudal system is really interesting and something that I never knew that I wanted to explore as deep as I did until I got into this book.
Come and see the violence inherent in the system! Help! Help! I'm being repressed! Bloody peasant! Oh, what a giveaway. Did you hear that? Did you hear that, eh?
But Min is in a very unique position in this book. He's granted more power by the crown, but then the crown is wanting more and more things of him, trying to draw him into their conflicts with the rebellious Olsharis, trying to like figure out like, hey man, we don't really like those Alcalalans, why are they talking to you and not us? And then also his position as ambassador to the Alcalalan and dealing with all these new kind of competing interests. It was just very interesting. And watching how he is still growing the arcane orders and just dealing with just being in the position of power it is, I thought it was a lot of fun just watching him juggle everything. Even something as simple in this part of the series as granting Erionite, still giving people unbelievable power, and the amount of political stuff that comes with that is very interesting. Having people now starting to come with him like Draenus and start to use his position for leverage, and the fact that whatever decision he's going to make, it might benefit others, but it will for sure piss off more people. So now there are no right answers. You are going to make decisions that you think are the best, but people aren't going to like that. So I really enjoyed seeing that expressed and just expounded on in this book. Second was the introduction of the Alka Council. So in the novella The Spellmonger's Honeymoon, book 2.5, which I did a review on, you got to see more in kind of in the weird convulsedness that is the Alkan society and political intrigue that doesn't really get touched up until this point. Having Min meet the Alka Council introduces a bunch of new factions. Some are pro-humanity and trying to do, but all of them seem to just really look down on humans as just sort of like dirty puppies that don't know what they're doing. And that's like the best case scenario. You get to start to get introduced into the Enshadowed and just seeing just how horrific some of these guys are. It's like magical elf Nazis that just love human and experimentation and just pushing things to the limit. Not the best enemies to have, but I really enjoyed now that we're starting to build out into these wider factions. The first few books was kind of getting Min into the position, dealing with political intrigue, having to just directly contend with the fact that Shrule is on the border and he's gonna have to fight him. But now that we're starting to widen out the conflict and just see how many moving pieces they are, this is something that the series just continues to expand, and it continues to expand, and is something that I very much enjoy. By book 14, it is mind-boggling just how many different factions and powers that are at play, but I think this book is the one that you really start to see things start to expand out. Third, and when I wrote this list, I did not realize that I would cover it kind of in my first point. But just watching Min's growing power, you're starting to see that arcane expression to manifest in new ways. Sort of the Hawkster Pockets, the Snowstone, the Humani definitely have an advantage that it seems like in war, but with the Alkalan starting to join him, he's starting to gain some real power. The fact that one of his vassals now is an Alkan Lord, or vassal, he's starting to get a lot more resources than he had before. The Alkalalon, or at least factions of them, are helping really like push the human invention. Having Unranian and like some of the Stone Singers like helping him just grow his power. I think that this is just a really kind of fun thing, and not to spoil anything for the later books, but it really manifests itself in some very epic ways. In this book, you start to see what he can do just making a battle staff, but there's a book down the line called Enchanter that just really gets crazy, but you know, having him start to get flying hawks, having him like continue to build his castle, grow resources. Money wasn't a problem in this book, but he had other constraints. So you started to watch some of these constraints sort of fall away as men gets more powers and answers. It's one of the compelling things about the series. You just really get to see that like full-on progression. But now that we got some momentum, I think that this book was a very fun expression of that. Fourth was the world building. This still ties into some of the other points, but the world's getting bigger. You're starting to see like Korbald, you're starting to see more of the Shrul and what he's doing, just how the conflict is changing. He's creating new eugenic things. They are starting to gain their power. You're watching the political conflict as like Tavard comes into power, gets married, and just watching just how the politicals just get more and more entrenched, while also dealing with the Alkalalon, who look at him as a bunch of puppies and are just slowly dragging their feet to just give them any sort of help whatsoever. So watching this world grow and the factions get on there, at the end of the book you find out that the Alkas are really scared of pissing off the Sea Folk, and how like in compared to the Alka to the humans, the Sea Folk look at the Alkans just kind of the same way. And there's just these massive power gaps where when you have a literal god saying like, hey, yeah, they're right to be worried. So let's try not to make too many waves, because this is pretty low stakes compared to the powers that are actually at play in this world. And lastly, I really enjoyed the finale to this book. I think suddenly being able to materialize the gods, introduce that new faction and power into play, start introducing more theology into the books, and dealing with the whole manifestation of the human subconscious and how magic played a role in that, and just having that culminate in a truly epic battle where you're fighting dragons, you're seeing just a full utilization of everything that we've learned in the series so far, and then just to have that all neatly wrap up in kind of a peace treaty. It really made me excited to continue reading down the book, and that's saying something because I reread this a month or two ago and didn't take any notes, so I had to reread this very much quicker than I normally would. So for me to get pulled back in towards the end of this and like really just want to continue listening and get sucked back in, a month after reading this previously, that I think really says something about just how fun that this book was. It's so hard to go back and review these books because I know what's going to happen further on, and I'm not even completely up to date with this series, but series spoilers. I will be talking about what I know about the series at large. Rereading this and like seeing how like certain factions come to play and some of the like hints that are being nested in there, I think was extremely interesting. One of the like most interesting things for like my entire reread and reviewing this series has been just kind of watching the Alkalalon. Where I'm at, you find out that the Alkalalon were responsible partially for sinking Perwyn. They're the ones for kicking humans back into sort of just this medieval shit show. They were on even footing with the humans and absolutely hated that because they are just masters at subjugating different races, and just their whole history with the Enshadowed and just the terribleness that their race has gone through. Just watching just how arrogant and dismissive they are of humans is just completely infuriating. In the beginnings of this book, you just see how reverent Min is and just kind of like, oh, the Alkalalons, these beneficial elves, and just been so helpful to humans, but it's just this weird kind of facade and just manipulation, and knowing that they're just biding their time in order to escape the planet completely because there are even bigger issues that are going to happen. It was just like going back and like knowing all that and having it in my head and just watching the council be just arrogant and condescending, and even the ones that are like helpful, just knowing that like, yeah, we just want to help you humans out, but they are legitimately the bad guys in this series, or at least not great. It's just going back and watching this was very interesting. Especially like when you know that they're hiding human technology that could absolutely bring them back to like Perwyn levels, or at least be like super helpful for this. It's just mind-boggling, just the arrogance and knowing the history of the Alkalalon, just how shitty they are of allies and just complete condescending assholes. Two, it's fun like watching the hints being laid down there about like Korbal. Like, he's been mentioned multiple times, even from like book 1 as like the Demon King of the Mendans, but knowing that he's going to be like kind of the big main bad guy of the series, or at least the main bad guy of the sections that I got to where they're fighting way bigger enemies and other issues that they're going to have to deal with later on. But in this book, you know, you're starting to see how they have been pulling the strings, like not directly, but knowing that they are attacking the Alkalan in order to release Korbal and just start that whole like chain of ascension for the Shadowed. And it was just very interesting to like watch how all that's being laid out and coming to pieces. This book did a very good job in multiple ways of just kind of like laying down some kind of little mystery boxes. It's like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen to that, in something as simple as like a goblin snowshoe, but then just them not quite understanding like what the goblins are actually doing, but having the context that like, oh, they're trying to bring back a lich. That's bad. It's just cool to see all this kind of laid out. And I think that the series, once like Korbal actually makes a scene, like that's when you have like men have the full momentum of everything. So having him being laid out, I think was like pretty fun. And just, I'm really excited to get back into those parts of the book. Next, it was kind of funny, just Tekka plays such a big part in this later on, and when I was left off, the last book I think I read was the book 14, whenever Min meets the Yith and goes insane. But at that point they've like discovered like AI and like a lot of like the rifles and the different type of technologies and going, but just there was like a throwaway kind of scene or just foreshadowing about just how Draenus thought that Min desperately needs a hobby and was like, hey man, you seem stressed, why don't you just go mess around with this Tekka? You spend a lot of money on it, just play around. But it was just such like a small little scene, but that sort of unlocks just a domino effect of just kind of the craziness that happens with it. That's another thing I do like about this series, is like the magic gets wider, the political power gets more kind of intriguing and diverse. Whenever fantasy and sci-fi start to mix together, that's something I always get like very excited about. And we haven't quite gotten fully to that point yet where I was at in the series, but it was left at a point where you know that it's gonna start happening. And just seeing the expression of like how magic kind of took place in the series, I'm very, very excited to see kind of that explosion of Tekka and just what's gonna happen with that hybrid, where in the current society they've been very much magic focused, but what is that going to look like by integrating tech into there, when normally I'll see like a technological society that then magic is integrated into. Very excited to see that. And lastly, I wanted to talk about sort of the introduction of the gods and sort of that giant headache slash possibilities that will open. I think that actually having gods in the series, they were done in such a way where one issue I've had with other series is like once you start to actually give divine intervention, it's like you nullified the plot and the stakes. And you know, if you have literal gods in play, like it's a weird kind of plot armor that I haven't really ever seen done well. But the way that the divine gods are done in this series as kind of the manifestations of the human subconscious on a world where they are very much not the most powerful things in play, it's just very interesting. And that was something that as the series kept progressing, you saw more and more gods kind of get in there, and sort of the weird hijinks that just having a bunch of gods start to manifest can cause. That's something even with the Tekka I'm like very excited to see, especially how that's going to mix together. And David Green did a video a while back about how like with the human subconscious you could focus in on how like human subconscious, it kind of works like a mantle. If you focus on certain thing, then like divine manifestation can happen. So something that I've always been curious about is as Min gets more power, as like Tekka gets involved, then what's going to happen when like the peasants who are still illiterate and coming from a medieval society start experiencing this like grand magic on this giant scale? Is Min going to become a semi-divine god, which kind of gets an ungodly amount of power to begin with, but what's going to happen with like the level 5 AIs that start running everything and are probably going to get worshipped? Does that mean they're also going to start manifesting divine powers? Just really interesting to think, and I just wanted to touch on it because this is the book that starts to introduce the gods in Brigga. And you know, as we keep going, you're going to see more interesting gods manifest. But now that we have like a medieval society with established religions, I'm curious to see how that's going to be explored later on in the series. It's crazy to think there's going to be like 30 books I think right now planned, and I'm not even halfway through this series, but just so much happens. Just a lot of cool shit to look forward to. All that being said, but had a great time reading this book. I think Journey Mage Coming Up is probably one of my favorite books in the series because it has some very interesting things, and that's a book I'm going to be picking up in September, and I'm very excited to recover that just because out of the two, I think that one was my more favorite, but we're getting further into the series where I think things get really crazy. So if you made it this far, then there's going to be a lot of cool stuff happening, and the world is just going to go absolutely insane. So if you are up to this point, you have a lot to look forward to, and really cool things are going to be on the horizon for this series. But if you have any general thoughts, then please let me know down below. If you have any series spoiler thoughts, and try to like put some sort of like hidden spoiler marker on them just so you don't ruin everything. I think when you get to the series spoiler section of this video, there are some very interesting points I've seen a lot of people talk about in the Spellmonger community, so just try not to ruin too much for them. But appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video, and as always, take it easy.